think sometimes that's where DEI goes slightly wrong. It sort of dresses everything up as just being nice, which it can be, but it can also be contentious.
Hello and welcome to the meeting room. I'm Holly Patrick.
And I'm James Lancaster.
James, we're back in the podcast studio and we are looking ahead, 2025, the year ahead, and what it might have in store for event planners. So maybe let's start with some of your predictions for the year ahead.
I don't really like making predictions, but if you're going to put me on the spot, I think obviously this is a global industry, so there are going to be regional variations. I want to be optimistic, but I think it's going to be, could be a bumpy year ahead for event planners. I think if you look at the latest pulse surveys, which we do with Cvent, All-Star does with Cvent, both in the United States and in Europe, the data from those shows that cost is still going to be a real issue for event planners in 2025. So that's no different. It's been like that for several years, but it's not going away, this issue of cost. It's still the main concern. So I think event planners are going to be looking at that. How do we create events that have that spark, leave attendees satisfied and happy, and give their clients the ROI that they're looking for without costs spiraling out of hand. So that's going to be an issue. And we know how difficult it is to keep inflation under control, right? I mean, in the UK, it's creeping up again. It's back up to 2.6. In Germany, inflation is creeping back up again. America, it's down below 4%, I think, but that's still higher than what they want it to be. And, some economists are worried about Trump coming in, what kind of inflationary pressure that could have on the economy in the United States, especially if he does go ahead with these incredible tariffs he's promising, 25% tariff on goods from Canada, for example.
My goodness.
And when he's talking about, tighter immigration controls, if that leads to labour shortages, that can have an inflationary impact. So, I think, this is about event planners doing what they do best, which is making magic out of nothing, basically. And they've been doing it for years, and I suspect they'll do it again. And I suspect it will be a good year in the round. I think it's going to be a good year of recovery. But, it's still going to be tricky with this cost issue and the kind of unknown quantity that is Donald Trump.
So you want to be optimistic, but we have to look at the cost issue. Do you think there's anything else that was pointed out in the poll surveys that we ran that could possibly help these event planners throughout the year and in the years ahead? Yeah,
I mean, the pulse surveys at the end of 2024, they came out in December, the last pulse surveys, they were by no means negative. I don't want to give the wrong impression. For a lot of planners, they're going to get a budget increase, for example. I think more so in America, 56% of US planners were going to receive a budget increase. And the kind of average increase was around 11%, so a double-digit increase for those planners lucky enough to get one.
That's brilliant.
It is. Costs, however, they're predicting that costs will be up by around 12%. So it's keeping pace. So the budget increase will be more or less keeping pace with cost increases. In Europe, I think the number of planners who are expecting an increase was something like 38%. So it's not as much. Most were expecting either budgets to stagnate or decrease. But those lucky enough again to get one, they were predicting a sort of average increase of between 5 and 14%. That was kind of the sweet spot, the average. So that's higher than we're expecting inflation to be in the next 12 months in the UK at least. So yeah, there are definitely positive signs. One positive sign in Europe is the fact that a lot of, I think it's about 30%, at least a third of planners in Europe were expecting to make additional hiring, more staff.
Oh, right.
So adding staff to their existing number, which is a lot more than in the States, where it was something like 19%. I think it was almost twice. I think it was something like 19% of planners in the States were expecting to add to their numbers against 38% in the UK.
I don't know if the pulse survey goes into this specific detail, but do you think that's because in Europe we haven't gone back back to those pre-pandemic levels of staffing? So we're still working on getting up there, or do you think we've reached that limit and now we're expanding?
It's a good question, because last year we saw a lot of merger and acquisition activity. And one theory I heard for that is because we actually have a staffing crisis. It's very difficult to hire the right people now. So it's actually easier for companies looking to expand to simply take another company over. So, yeah, whether we've kind of saturated that now, I don't know. Whether there are more M&A mergers and acquisitions we should expect this year, I'm not sure. Certainly, I think it's a positive sign if European agencies are looking to recruit. It also means that quality that they hope to deliver shouldn't be too badly affected. What is quite interesting, the difference between the United States and Europe as well, is that in America, they're far more willing to pass on the added costs to the delegate.
Right.
So they increase the ticket price. In the EMEA, Europe, Middle East and Africa, far fewer planners were willing to do that. So it looks as though the Americans are sort of much more aggressive in maintaining their profit margins in that respect. But there are other signs of positive signs in the survey as well. I mean, the kind of post-pandemic angst between supplier and buyer, if you like, seems to be easing off now. So if you look at things like RFP time it takes for an RFP to be responded to, that's coming down. The number of planners who are getting happier with service levels, finding venues, things like F&B price, like that kind of stuff. In the last pulse survey, it showed that discontent with all of that was lower. So there seems to be the relationship between supplier and buyer seems to be improving, which is very positive, I think, for the industry.
Yeah, that's a relief to hear, because we heard that a lot of feedback, didn't we, from event planners saying they can't get hold of hotels, they don't know who the events teams have changed. So I guess all of that fits into the wider puzzle now.
I think it does, and I think a lot of this is a sort of hangover from the pandemic. You talk to people about the pandemic, and a lot of people now say, "Oh, we don't mention the P word, we don't mention COVID. It's all an excuse now, blah blah blah." But that the COVID affected this industry probably more than any other industry, outside hospitality, and it was shuttered for the best part of 2 years. It had a huge effect on this industry, and obviously it's taken a while for that to for the impact of that to get back to normal, basically. So it did happen, and no matter how much people would like to pretend it didn't happen and tell us all not to talk about it, I think what we're seeing is a kind of still a gradual return to normal, and relations between buyer and supplier have taken a while to get back to normal, but they are now.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to work together. We shouldn't be at loggerheads all the time.
No.
So it's really positive that the Pulse survey is saying that.
The Pulse survey is more positive than negative, definitely. And optimism levels, especially in the States, are high. And there's a slight dip in Europe on optimism levels, but I think, they go up and down every 3 months, so I don't take those too seriously. But how about you? What are your predictions? I understand, I know you're sort of quite interested in AI and where that's going. What are your thoughts about AI?
As it comes as no surprise at all, it is here to stay. And I think probably the first thing I'll say about AI is that we need to come away from always just stating it's here to stay. We know it is. We use it all the time. Even if we're not aware we're using it at work, we might be using it in our home lives. And so the same Pulse survey that we put out at the end of 2024 came back, and the respondents said, 56% of them said they had started using AI platforms in some form or another. They weren't too specific. And 25% said they hadn't used them yet, but they're planning to. So it's on the radar. And I wonder if that kind of, we haven't sort of stepped into it yet, comes around a fear factor. You don't know how to use them properly. But I think what becomes really evident with AI platforms is they're designed in such a way that you don't have to think about using them. It's like Google. It's so simple. It takes the legwork out, and that is the intention of AI. It's not a tool to make your life harder. So the consensus that came from the Pulse survey around event planners using AI, 10% of them said it's been absolutely transformative. It's streamlined their processes. It's really helped them be more creative, and it's had a significant impact. However, so that's 10%, which is, all right. More than half said it hadn't had a significant impact at all. So I think that begs the question, what sort of platforms are people using? I mean, when I say to you, think of an AI platform, what comes to mind?
Chat GPT, stuff like Claude, the legal one.
I think, and what I was definitely hearing at the end of last year, and I think personally as well, when it comes to talking about, if you're not an AI UX designer, if you're not creating these platforms, if you're an end user, what platforms, what tools should we be using? I mean, how many times last year and the year before did you hear the phrase, AI won't take your job, someone who knows how to use AI will take your job?
Yeah, everyone said that. And I don't believe them, really, do you?
No, I don't believe them. And I think these are kind of these like buzz phrases that we just need to come away from saying. And instead of kind of thinking about it, at this sort of level, let's use it at a really practical level, because that's why these platforms exist.
There's often a kind of pressure to sort of be using AI and to learn skills around AI, which strikes me as a little bit strange, because with most of the technology, we use it when it becomes available and when it becomes useful, and when the kind of usability of the technology becomes such that anybody can use it. We don't really think about, I don't know how to code, I don't know how to write JavaScript, but I've always used computers. So I don't know how much of this is the AI industry itself telling us that we need to be all over it.
I think it's just about consistency, and I think it's about getting the best out of the tools that are in front of you. So our keen viewers for the meeting room will have watched our episode on this, episode on AI last year with Tommy Moore and Ed Poland, who said that we mustn't have too much of a reliance on AI in these platforms, but it is fundamental that we use them to the best of our capabilities. So whether that's prompts, and it's got as much detail in there as possible to give you, for example, maybe something in our job might be a headline or a creative spark to write our own headline, something like that. But I think what we shouldn't be doing is using them for the end game, for the end product. We can't, at this stage, I would say, be relying on these AI platforms to sort of do all the work. But I will say, although I don't think that AI is going to make everybody's job redundant, I do think it will become a required skill set in a way, whether there's sort of like accountancy AI platforms, or Grammarly, for example, takes away our job a little bit, doesn't it? I mean, I'm contradicting myself here already. And the worries around AI are real. So last year when I was at the Meetings Industry Association Summit in Liverpool, they did an audience survey, and 50% said they're worried about the potential harm to company culture and dehumanizing. So taking away, I don't know, that kind of like creative flair with each other and getting together and coming up with a great idea. 37% were concerned about privacy issues. So this is a big one, definitely, when it comes to AI. And I think maybe we're so giddy about using them and getting the output that we forget that we shouldn't be putting personal data in there at all, anybody else's personal data. And I was speaking to someone about this in the industry last year, because they had to go through survey data, and they had just reams and reams and reams of it, and they thought, if I just dump all of this into a platform, it will sort it out for me. Before they did that, quickly realized that if they were to do that, they're just breaking all the GDPR rules,
right? Yeah,
because it had people's names and email addresses and things like that on there. And the reason that this can be so harmful when it comes to security is that a lot of the platforms we use, like ChatGPT, are these open source language learning models. So they learn from what you put in. So we do need to be really careful of that. But yeah, AI is, hopefully it'll be the last time I say it this year, is here to stay. We've absolutely established that.
It is. Do you think one of the dangers of AI is that it depends on your kind of opinion of human nature in a way? So you could argue positively that humans will use AI to be more creative, to give them that spark, and then go on and build something bigger and better. Isn't there a danger that for a lot of people, AI will just be a shortcut, and it will be, it will appeal to the lazier side of human nature, and you end up with everybody just sort of getting to the finishing line as quickly as possible, and the end results across the industry are very samey, and there's a kind of lack of individuality as a result of overuse of AI?
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that already. I think if you're really scrupulous and you look at LinkedIn posts, you can tell the ones that have been written by the AI assistant in the LinkedIn box, and you think, oh, just scroll past that because this isn't my connection talking. This is the AI assistant talking. I think we need to be really careful about our over-reliance on AI, and I think we need to look at all of these tools and these platforms as something that complements our skill set, so we can upskill by using AI. But we shouldn't be relying on it to write news stories, for example, or destination features, or to analyze all the data, because as you know, when you go through the Pulse survey, there's lots of little tidbits in there that you can pull out, and that's the creative side of it. That's the creative side of it as well. And I think when it comes to originality, I don't know if this applies to all of the AI platforms out there, but from the ones that I think are used the most, nothing is really original on there. So you can bet if you're using it to write an RFP or a response to an RFP or a bid proposal or something like that, then it's going to sound a lot like everybody else's if they've also used it.
It can give you like the base source, but you have to put your own herbs in.
Yeah.
I don't know where that came from.
I like that. I like that little bit of sorcery.
Yeah.
But from our perspective, my perspective as a journalist, and we've heard about writer's block forever and ever and ever. And sometimes, we're on deadline. We have to get things done quickly. Not always, but if it is a news story, and you've gone off and you've made a cup of tea and you sit back down again and you still can't think of that word, of course you can go on synonyms or thesaurus, and often you do that. But if you think, okay, let's think outside of the box here, ChatGPT can be really good for those sorts of things. Also, on the flip side, it can be really reassuring that you're better at your job than these platforms.
So what other predictions do you have for the year ahead?
So as I'm sure you're aware, we're coming to the end of Dry Jan now, which I've successfully been participating in.
How did it go?
Yeah, it went pretty well, actually. I mean, there were definitely a few times where I was reaching for that nice chilled bottle of Sauvignon Blanc.
Was the hand on the bottle?
It was just in the fridge, laid down, saying, "Drink me, have a glass." But
so you didn't empty your house of alcohol. You had some alcohol in the house for the last 4 weeks.
Despite what you might think about me, I do have a little bit of
self-control.
Self-control. Yeah, thank you.
We saw that at the Christmas party, didn't we?
Yeah. As I shepherded everyone to the train station.
Yeah.
So it went pretty well, and I definitely feel the benefits of it. My skin, I think, just looks better. Maybe that's a placebo effect, I don't know. I have more energy, and I was never a big drinker anyway, but just not having my body working extra hard to get rid of that sort of things. The physical exercise just becomes easier if you haven't had a glass of wine.
Did you drink a lot over Christmas?
Oh, I drank a huge amount over Christmas. Every day over Christmas.
Right.
And I went to my grandparents, who love a glass of champagne. I went to my mum's, who loves a Baileys, like a big measure of Baileys. So everything was going on, all the things that you would never normally drink. Yeah, it came out. So definitely an overindulgence. Did you? You've still got a couple. As we're recording, you've still got a couple of days of January left. So you're not quite over the finish. Yeah. No, I think I'll be okay. And this did happen to me a few years ago, where I got right to the end, and a social occasion came up. So what I did was I drank and then tacked it on to February. There's no rules. Yeah. So it's like Dry Jan and Feb. But, I've had friends who have done it, who have done dry Jan that's then led into the rest of the year kind of thing. So
yeah, that happens.
It's got some great benefits. Yeah, it's got some great benefits.
And millions of people are doing it now.
Millions of people doing it. So 9 million people were estimated to do it this year, which is up 1 million from last year, which was 8 million people. So that's a significant amount of people who are making this pledge, who obviously are drinkers as well, do consume alcohol.
Do you feel now like going on a bender, or do you feel like your body is just kind of used to not drinking now?
You know what I feel, and I think maybe it's similar to event delegates only going to events that they really, really want to. I only want to drink alcohol that I know that I really, really enjoy. So I know it sounds a little bit pretentious, but like a really good champagne or an English sparkling wine, or I love Heineken, like a bottle of Heineken, sort of things like that. I love a Heineken. So I don't think, it doesn't have to be great alcohol, but just things that you enjoy, instead of being somewhere and thinking, oh, well, that's a room temperature bottle of wine. Yeah, I'll have a glass of that, So you kind of have that. Yeah,
so it has changed the way you drink.
Yeah, I think so. And whether that will last, I don't know. You go back into old habits. But also, and gosh, this makes me sound so old, going out to drink is super expensive now.
Yeah.
So, and we don't really drink that much at home. It has to be a special occasion or have people around. So I think we've already got those sort of boundaries in place, and then this is just going to make it a little bit easier for us. But what about you? Did you do dry Jan?
I didn't do dry Jan because, well, I had every intention of doing dry January, and then, kind of the days just blur at the end of December and January. It was January the 4th before I realised it was January type thing. So I missed the boat, but I might well do it in February.
Okay.
I have a sort of intention of doing it next month. But so do you think, I mean, this plays into the whole idea of sober inclusion and around events. So the idea was that it is going to become a big thing, sober inclusion. Do you think it is?
Yeah, I think it's a huge thing. I think the stats speak for themselves around these things. A rise of Google searches, internet searches for sober curious drinks. So you're going out, what can you drink instead of the classic wine or beer or things like that? So people want to know what is already out there. Also generationally, and I think in this industry we also talk a lot about the younger generations coming up, talent acquisition and things like that. So, catering for your workforces as well. People are more discerning about what events they go to and the time that they spend there. So make it worth it for them. And if they're driving home, make sure that they still feel included with a nice equivalent drink. So if you've got a champagne, have a 0% bubbles, that's the equivalent, or a nice mocktail. Who doesn't love a good fruit, a fruity juice? So I think coming out of Dry Jan this month, where we know 9 million people in the UK alone have participated, event planners would be silly not to sort of go and head into 2025 with that same ethos of, okay, we need to make sure we're catering for this dietary as well, because that's what it is. Essentially, it's a preference, it's a choice. So I think that sober inclusion is going to be a massive talking point as we go into 2025. But why don't we talk about some of the more macro, wider issues that are affecting the events industry at the moment? Maybe let's start on the small topic of DEI.
In America, it certainly seems to have become a real kind of political flashpoint in the last couple of years. It's become synonymous, DEI, I think, with woke or progressive politics in America in a way that I don't think it necessarily has to the same extent over here, or especially not in Europe. It will be interesting to see, to sort of draw a comparison between how DEI plays out in Europe and America this year. I think that's what's going to be interesting in terms of the event industry. Obviously, some people have seen Trump's victory and the rise of other populist movements around Europe as a kind of repudiation of progressive politics and woke. Whether it is or not, I'm not entirely sure. I think that might be part of it, but not all of it. But before Trump's victory, a lot of the big household name companies in America were dialing back their DEI policies or scrapping them altogether. I think that was around fear of litigation, in terms of providing equal opportunities for everyone. There's a kind of perverse paradox there that if you single out certain groups for better treatment, you inevitably, or according to some people, you kind of there's a knock-on effect on other groups. So I think there's fear of litigation is driving a lot of that in America. How will it play out in the events industry? I don't know. It's interesting. The Destinations International, which is a sort of alliance of convention bureau based in the States, they recently rebranded their DEI policy and have now call it social inclusion. They will obviously say that's a very positive step and they have their own reasons for it. I can't help feeling it has something to do with the toxicity of DEI in the States. There does seem to be a shift. Have we reached peak woke? When I speak to DEI consultants and ask them this question about whether DEI is political, they always insist it isn't political. But maybe we need to accept that at least some of it is. So when you go to a trade show, for example, you might see a sign on the wall saying, anybody who identifies as this gender can use this toilet, for example. So that would allow a biological male to use a women's only toilet or a women's toilet. So that sounds inclusive, but a lot of people would feel affronted by that. A lot of people would feel excluded by that. So with a small p at least, that is political. So I think if we have to find a third way, some kind of compromise in that situation, then we should be willing to do that rather than risk just upsetting a lot of people. And I think sometimes that's where DEI goes slightly wrong. It sort of dresses everything up as just being nice, which it can be, but it can also be contentious and a little bit political. So I think we just need a little bit more humility about some of these issues, which are substantive and they are worthy of debate, a lot of them. So yeah, I think that needs to be addressed probably in 2025, and it'd be interesting to see how event planners deal with those kind of issues.
Is it too big? DEI, you know, diversity, equity, and I think for a while it was equality, but it's more equity now, isn't it? And inclusion. I mean, how do you change equity at a conference for your delegates who are coming there? You know, you don't really have that much of a say about what's going on. Of course, you can run programs which get people who wouldn't otherwise be there or have the means to be there in the room, but a lot of organisations don't have the means to do that. So you know, where do you stand? It can't be a one rule for everyone, sort of accreditation, DEI accreditation, which in a perfect world would be great. But I think you make an interesting point actually about the gender neutral toilets. So I had them at the university I went to, but as well as gender neutral toilets, we also had female and male toilets. So there was a choice, you know, and I think that's what event planners should be bearing in mind as well. There's always that choice that you should be giving your delegates, and also part of, you know, the planning team as well. I think DEI, obviously, it's a massive topic, and from what I've heard and what I've seen, event planners, sometimes it's an afterthought, and because it is such a big topic, there's panic that's associated with it as well, and they think, okay, we need this person for a panel, but they might not be the most well suited, you know. And I've seen, for example, someone who was completely unqualified and actually had nothing to say, happened to be a male on a menopause panel. You know, not to say that he couldn't have been a complete expert, but for terms of, you know, optics, diversity, it just didn't really work. You know, why you know, I think when it comes to DEI, it has to be thoughtful and it has to be thought out.
I don't think people are going to be terribly offended if a panel on a certain issue is either predominantly male or predominantly female. I don't think people are that bothered. I mean, what they want to see is appropriate representation. What they want to see is people who deserve a place on a panel because of their expertise being on it, and they don't want to see anyone left out, but it's not who should be on it. What they don't care about, I don't think, is this kind of optics, like you say, we need somebody from, we need a woman, a man, someone black, someone white. We don't need that. It's not important to have that mix on every single panel.
What does it serve? Who does it serve?
It serves nothing. To be fair to DEI consultants that I speak to, they're often very thoughtful people, right? They are actually themselves thinking very deeply about these issues. But people who aren't thinking deeply about it, who are just ticking boxes, I think that causes a lot of the antagonism, funnily enough. So like you said about the toilets issue, that's, you know, the perfect solution is just to make sure there's choice for everybody, you know. But if you're going to sort of say, I think the problem is when you're kind of framing ideas as moral imperatives and sort of saying, and it sort of looks virtuous because you're doing something when you haven't really thought it through. That's what gets people's backs up, I think. And I wonder if that in the long run is actually causing more harm than good. That's the problem. Is it actually working, or is it leading to a more divided society?
I think things like that, exactly what you said, can be more exclusionary, because people don't know where they stand or what they're supposed to be doing. It doesn't come, you know, natural if it hasn't been explained. So I definitely think there's more of an education piece around all of this. Also, when it comes to things like DEI, in fact, all the topics that we've spoken about, but DEI at the moment, we can't be gatekeepers of it. We can't own these topics. We can't be the sort of, you know, all-seeing, all-knowing oracle on these topics. We have to share and collaborate, because
and I think that's another irony about so much of this sort of more progressive DEI policies we've seen in the last few years. A lot of it seems to me has a very kind of metropolitan bias anyway. You know, has a very metropolitan sort of English-speaking bias to it anyway. You go abroad and speak to people, and they sort of, you know, look at you as though you're mad when you're talking about this stuff. So there are kind of ironies to all of this stuff. I think the important thing to remember, though, is that, you know, an inclusive event is better than a non-inclusive event, and for an event planner, there are actually things you can do. It's one of those areas where when you look at inclusion and equity, event planners can actually do something. There's, I think, a lot of jobs where you can't really, you're helpless, but if you're organising an event, you can really start to make inroads.
For me, some of the really great examples that I've seen around inclusion at events are first-timer sessions, and it sounds such a simple concept. So the conference has already started. If you're a first-timer, and when I went to Site Global Forum in Istanbul this time last year, actually, that was the first-timer session that I'd been to, and it took an hour out of the main conference. There was probably 100 people in the room. And we had little networking sessions, and it just makes you feel part of it, because although we all do this for a living, we attend a lot of conferences, they've got different formats, they've got different programs. So, and if nobody explains that to you, you're at risk of not networking enough and just missing out as well. So if someone sits down, we're not too different from the children we were in junior school, we kind of still need that guidance. So
but that's interesting, isn't it? Because that wouldn't have been positioned as DEI probably. It's just something they're doing to make people feel welcome.
Yeah.
So I think in many ways, a good bit of DEI is something you don't really recognise as DEI. It's just become part of the fabric of the conference. Yeah. And if you go to a conference and feel welcome, if you go to a conference and feel as though you're part of it and your voice is heard, without any kind of obvious, virtue signalling, if it just happens seamlessly, then the event planner has done their job well, I think. And they've really thought about it. They haven't just sort of what's going to look good.
Shimmied in at the last minute. Yeah. It's like a joke, isn't it? The difference between a good joke and a bad joke. Good joke, you don't actually have to explain it.
Yes.
And it's the same with these strategies and these initiatives. It should, like you say, just make you feel included. And that's what these first timer sessions, I've been to a few now, and they just make me feel like, I am supposed to be here. And actually my attendance is valued to an extent. So that's great. And another one that I'm seeing a lot more as a strategy is real-time captions.
Yeah.
Which is great. You don't have to be deaf, hard of hearing.
No. Real-time captions and these incredible instantaneous translation tools like Wordly, who translate the main speaker into your chosen language on an app. Incredibly accurate, these things now. And that's a really important piece of inclusion as far as I'm concerned, because for so long we were expected to listen to a kind of globalish, kind of universal English, which didn't sound great and meaning was lost. But now people can go on stage and speak their natural language, and people can have it translated. And I hope that becomes more of a thing, that people can speak in their first language. And I should be expected as an English speaker to go onto an app, and I can do it. I can have their language translated into English. So I hope that becomes a thing. That would be real inclusion, and that would mean that people say what they really mean to say, rather than having it sort of go through a second language. But yeah, I think that's again, I think that's part of gatekeeping that needs to come down. We need to sort of dismantle. If we are truly an international business, and if international associations, for example, truly claim to be international associations, then they should be having speakers who can speak in their first language, and then people can translate it on an app.
It makes sense, doesn't it? When you think about it, it's like, oh yeah, why haven't we always done this? Because there hasn't always been the tools to do it, and it's been really expensive in the past, But AI, tools nowadays, I don't actually know what they cost, but I'm sure they're greatly reduced from what they were. So and it's a quick win as well, and it's also noticeable. It's kind of, again, like you say, you don't have to do any virtue signaling or explain it to the delegates, because it is just there. It is just there, and it makes sense.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you had anything else to add to DEI.
No, I think we'll leave it there.
Let's leave that there. Yeah, and of course these are our predictions, and I guess a bit of opinion in there as well. But
I think just to finish, I think DEI is very different in America and Europe. So Europe especially, but maybe the UK is getting a bit more like America. But I think if you talk about DEI in Europe, it's far less political. I think DEI became almost synonymous with woke with sort of campus politics in America, in a way that it hasn't really in the UK and Europe. So two different ways of looking at it.
The last thing that I think I want to speak about today is around legacy. We write a lot about legacy. We've featured legacy a lot. We speak about it. I think we've got a good grasp of what legacy is intended to do and what legacy is intended to be.
Legacy is two things, isn't it? It's the kind of theoretical, kind of strategic positioning of the meetings industry, and people like Joint Meetings Industry Council, James Latham with the Iceberg, and then things like the IBTM Policy Forum and the Politicians Forum at IMEX, that kind of thing, where the industry as a whole is trying to reposition itself as this something that has wide societal benefits, benefits the economy, and not just in terms of bed nights and tourism, but in terms of research and development, inward investment, knowledge transfer, those kind of things. So I think there's that kind of higher kind of strategic legacy we talk about. And then there's the kind of more practical legacy in terms of what can event organisers do to make their event have more of an impact than it currently does on society. So there are two slightly different ways of looking at legacy. Either way, this is something that refuses to die.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of glad it refuses to die, actually, because it is more meaningful to talk about business events as having this societal impact, because it does. And it's not just about tourism, and it's not just about how much delegates spend in a city, and cities realise that now. So it pleases me that it's not dying legacy. So I as much as people like James Latham kind of go on about it, and he can drive you mad, bless him. I'm glad he is banging on about it. I'm glad he is. I'm glad he's not letting it go, because I think it's important. And also, I think what they've worked out, if we're being honest about this, is that there's a link between legacy and sustainability that is on the horizon. There's this looming threat of carbon taxes, of for a long time, the idea of traveling, flying 10,000 people around the world for a conference just kind of flew under the radar in terms of sustainability, but it's no longer doing that. Ironically, because of COP and these big climate conferences, people are starting to look at conferences now and saying, really? That's a lot of people getting on an airplane. So I think the industry is having to raise its voice and say, yeah, but it's not leisure tourism. It is actually people, a lot gets done in these conferences. I've sat in seminars in medical conferences before, just to get a look and a feel of what's going on. And, there's some serious work that gets done. The people, avidly taking notes. There's a lot of knowledge that gets transferred, and that is useful to society. So I think it's right that the meetings industry is taking it seriously and is refusing to let this thing go. And I think it's a bit of future-proofing, actually.
I really do hope that the sustainability part of legacy picks up more traction as well, because, and I don't want to simplify it, but for me, legacy, how can you leave a legacy if there's nowhere to leave a legacy? And I think that's where the environmental sustainability part, really comes in. So when we're in a destination, or what can the delegates be doing? And I also think, much with DEI, it can't just be an afterthought. These things need to be, these strategies need to be really thought through. A few years ago now, I think it was 2023, I wrote a piece around green subventions, the rise of green subventions. And I think most people in this industry know what a subvention is. It's often from a convention bureau, destination, and they have a set criteria. And they will, it's a pot of money, and they'll give that to planners who promise to bring, let's say, at least 500 international delegates to their destination. Subvention. And there's plenty of subventions out there, from quite minor, we would say, destinations, smaller destinations, to major destinations, like Australia is one of the best known ones. And often the criteria is sort of just how many international delegates are you going to bring, how many room nights, and are you going to use a local DMC? However, when I was researching the piece for the rise of the green subventions, what became apparently clear is there is a lot of destinations and convention bureaus out there now who are not just going to give event planners these funding pots without knowing what legacy strategies they've got in place, what they're going to give back to local communities. And it can't just be a tick box exercise. That actually has to be something practical. And I think with DEI and with legacy as well, we have to put our money where our mouth is, because actions will always speak louder than words. And I know it's such a cliche, but we can talk and talk and talk about these topics. And often what I think we do as an industry, and I'm guilty of it as well, is we talk to the same people about these topics. So, what are we getting done there? So, James Latham does a brilliant job of bringing other people together and saying, you need to listen to what we've got to say.
One thing that the Iceberg is this a repository of kind of news and features about legacy, pertaining to the business events industry. It's run by the Joint Meetings Industry Council and it's edited by James Latham. So what they're trying to do this year is kickstart a campaign called One Message, Many Voices. I think that's what it's called. And that's a kind of recruiting drive for local kind of legacy ambassadors from cities around the world to kind of deliver this message to people in power. Essentially, it's kind of a recognition that the business events industry can't do this on its own because it doesn't have the resources, doesn't have the manpower, and doesn't have particularly active lobbying organizations, which is really strange for an industry that's so loud and talks about itself a lot. So this is a kind of recognition that the industry needs to get into kind of the corridors of power through other people, through sort of local experts who can talk about the power of conferences. So that's going to be kicking off in 2025, and we'll see how that goes. I mean, that is another point about what might or may not happen in 2025 around Trump's presidency and advocacy. I think this is really interesting because in the States they have the Exhibition and Conference Alliance, ECA, run by Tommy Goodwin, and that has become a very sort of determined lobbying advocacy organization for the events industry, but very US focused. And there isn't really a European equivalent. So, it could be that ICA takes that space in Europe, and although it's an international organization, it might be that PCMA do a bit more work in Europe around advocacy, or there may be a kind of offshoot of ECA in Europe at some point. But it does seem to me that it's a bit lopsided at the moment. So America has ECA doing a great job, and we don't seem to have that advocacy body in Europe necessarily.
That's interesting. And I wonder if that's sort of with Tommy Goodwin. I know that he's taken this as a career path, and it's also politics is a sort of passion project for him as well. So he's coming at it from both directions. And I wonder who the equivalent over here could be, and what sort of team that they could build up.
Well, we'll wait and see.
We will wait and see. So, James, they were our predictions for the events industry for 2025. We might be eating our own words this time next year.
We might be. It's always good to look forward and see, make these predictions. But after COVID, after Brexit, after Trump, it's difficult to make predictions really. But it's I think we see some underlying trends there that won't go away, and we will see how it all plays out in the next 12 months.
Definitely, and we'll still be talking about these topics.
We never stop talking about these things.
Yeah, so
we enjoy it.
You can count on us.
Cool.
Brilliant. Well, that's all we've got time for today, but join us again on The Meeting Room. See you soon.